Okay, so I've been seeing a lot of 30-minute to an hour long videos on YouTube about movies that people like. So I decided to do one about my favorite animated movie as a kid, Hoodwinked. Please, wait, where are you going? I know I have a lot of explaining to do. Just, hear me out. Please. I put a lot of work into this, guys. Who gives me free time?
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
I've seen Hoodwinked at least 20 times. 18 times on DVD and 2 times on Netflix. For me, it was one of those movies that got better every time you watched it, and I'll explain why down the line. But let me break down this movie as best as I can. I know this movie is not perfect. Definitely is not perfect, okay? And we're going to talk about its highs and higher highs and the other stuff. I also understand that the animation did not age well in this movie at all. But looking back at the budget this movie had, I totally understand. It's not an excuse, but I get it. And as a kid, it really didn't bother me because I didn't know what bad animation was, and it did not scare me as a kid. So I'm not really going to talk about the animation in this video at all, because it didn't affect my enjoyment of the movie, especially when I was a kid. And this really isn't a review, it's just why I like the movie in general. I also want to shout out the other YouTube reviews I found of this while I was writing this script. There's this one guy called Media Hunter Reviews who does a pretty good plot breakdown and review of this movie. And there's another video that perfectly edits the points of view of each character side by side. I wanted to shout them out because I'm not trying to copy them, I just really want to talk about this movie. So if some topics overlap, of course it's going to overlap because we're talking about the same shit. So I'm going to put both links to the videos that I saw in the description below. And I think that is everything. So let's break this movie down. Let's start with the world building. Now, Hoodwinked takes place in the woods where talking animals and talking humans coexist together. Now, it takes some elements from your favorite fairy tales and references many others throughout the film. A thing I like about this is that the animals speak English, but they still keep their mannerisms. For example, the raccoon cop asks to rummage through the grandma's garbage.
Do you think Granny would mind if I went through her garbage?
And the pig and goat characters both make their respected animal noises even when they're speaking English. And these animal and fairy tale examples serve as some quick comic humor that adds to the movie. For example, the bunny writing directions on an Easter egg is hilarious because it'd be something we would expect a bunny to do, but like all these animal mannerisms kind of come out of nowhere. You're not going into this movie expecting them to talk about bunnies writing directions on an Easter egg, or the three little pigs talking about how they made their house out of straws and they're not stupid. It's funny. It's good to see all these fairy tale references kind of come to life. And these quick one-liners also get us accustomed to the world in which the story exists in, which is pretty necessary. In this aspect, I can see why a lot of people compared this to Shrek off the jump, but I honestly think that takes away from this movie. I would compare this movie to more like a kid's version of Vantage Point or Pulp Fiction. Because yeah, the fairy tale inspired universe is something that Hoodwinked has in common with Shrek. However, I think that the actual movie plot compares more to a Vantage Point or a Pulp Fiction. Is Shrek a more successful series? Absolutely. Is Shrek a better movie series? Probably, but that's not the point I'm trying to make here. I think that if you compare these two movies just because they were fairy tales, then that's just a lazy review in my opinion. To me, that's like comparing Ocean's 11 to 21 just because the movies both involve ripping off casinos. You see what I'm talking about? Like, they involve something similar, but it's not the central focus of the movie. I'd rather compare Ocean's 11 to like Takers or some other shit because they both involve heists, because that's more relevant to the movie than the actual casino part. I might have made 0 sense there, I don't know, but I'm trying here. Alright, anyway. Now there are some questionable world building inconsistencies. For instance, in one scene, the wolf mentions the FDA.
Well, that's Earl right now, probably called the FDA.
Which would mean that the US government exists, and that this movie would take place in America, but all the cops are animals, and, okay. Well, this is just a throwaway line, and luckily there aren't that many slip-ups in this movie that I really noticed, so it's not that bad. Now, you learn even more about this world in the sequel, but that movie is absolute trash, and we will not talk about it. For the other fairy tale references, this world does a good job in terms of working them in without being annoying about it. For example, they reference how Wolf was trying to figure out the real name of Rumpelstiltskin.
I remember you. 3 years ago on the Stiltskin case, you were snooping around for a lead on his real name.
That was close, too. I was gonna go with Greg. Greg Stiltskin.
Hey, wait a minute, Flippers.
It's funny, it doesn't overstay its welcome, it works in the story's character background, and the plot continues on. This movie decided to alter otherwise normal banter into making it acceptable for this world so that it makes sense with this world. In this world, animals and humans act and are treated as equals. Actually scratch that. They coexist with each other. Alright, now I'll get into the story. So for the first half of the story, it's one main storyline that's told from 4 different points of view. And the movie starts at the plot point where the 4 main characters all meet each other at the same time for the first time. Now this scene is something that drops hints and stuff throughout. Matter of fact, this movie drops a lot of plot hints and how things aren't as they seem. And that's one of the reasons why that this movie gets better on the second and third rewatch. If you watch this movie in the theater and just didn't come back to it, there are a lot of things that you probably missed that you weren't able to go back to. And that's kind of why I'm making this video, because I had the DVD and I watched this movie over and over and over again, so I was able to pinpoint the little nuances that showed up earlier in the movie that either foreshadowed or made things a little bit more apparent. Now before I diagnose this scene, I guess I gotta say spoiler alert for those of you that made it to this part of the video already, which is kind of weird. As I make this video, it's currently on Netflix, so watch the movie first and then come back to this video. Duh. Alright, so the first scene is important because it's telling the audience that they're taking elements from something that we already know, the story of Red Riding Hood. But it's also telling us that it's not going to be that cut and dry. In the interaction, we see Red not recognize the wolf, but the wolf doesn't seem that scary at all. Now, because we already know the story of Red Riding Hood, he's wired as the antagonist already in the film. Now, during the scene after he's found out, Red Riding Hood gets into a fighting stance. Instead of taunting her, he goes,
"Save it, Red Foo!"
which is not the words you would hear from someone that isn't scared of you. This indicates that Red and the wolf have probably crossed paths somewhere before. Now, the movie takes a hard right turn when the grandma comes out of the closet and appears to have been tied up by the wolf. Now, we might miss this first because the reaction is too quick, but the wolf looks scared and conflicted why the grandma is even here, much less tied up.
Granny!
But you, that's a high fun.
This indicates that the wolf probably doesn't know as much as it seems to, but on first watch, it's too quick for us to register that simple flash reaction, because the Axeman comes in with enough shock value to make us forget the gesture entirely. And that's actually what the movie does pretty well. It actually drops a lot of clues and hints, but the movie goes on and they move on from it so fast that you don't even have time to register that what you saw was either a clue or a hint. Instead of why the wolf is surprised, we're thinking about how there is the potential axe murderer and what was going to happen after that. This movie does a good job of dispelling the notion that you already know what's going to happen. It's not your normal Red Riding Hood fairy tale that your parents used to read you. Now, for the first half of the movie, all 4 characters are detained by the cops and asked to tell them, and us, how the hell they got to Granny's house. Now, I'm not going to go line by line or scene by scene, but we're definitely going to go in order. We start with Red Riding Hood. During her tale, we see that Red Riding Hood is a kid that just wants to do more fun shit rather than deliver goodies all day on a bike for the family business. She's also the only character out of the 4 that interacts with or crosses paths with all of the other 3 characters before getting to Granny's house. During her arc, we learn about how powerful the Goody Bandit is, who was mentioned earlier in the movie. The Goody Bandit is a faceless character who is not only stealing recipes, but putting those whose recipes he stole out of business. After the establishment that she works out of gets hit with a rock that says "You're next," her new objective is to bring her family's secret recipes up the mountain to her grandmother's where she thinks it would be safer. Now her grandma's like, yo, don't do that, they'll be just fine down there, just stay down there. Does Red do that? Of course not. So Red decides to take a cable car which is ran by Boingo the Bunny up the mountain. Now Boingo's a character that we saw earlier in the arc. In his introduction, we learn that Boingo worked for the Muffin Man, and the Muffin Man's recipes got stolen, so Boingo is out of a job. At this point, we feel sorry for Boingo, the cute little unemployed bunny rabbit. Damn. And that intro scene of Boingo and the bicycle establishes that they trust each other. In fact, Red trusts Boingo so much apparently that she hints that she's carrying the recipes with her to Grandma's house. After that, there's a freak accident on the cable car, and Red falls out with what looks like Boingo trying to save her. This is where she runs into the wolf, who questions her and intimidates her to a point where she feels threatened and runs away. At this point in the movie, the wolf seems like the main villain in all of this. Now from here, Red goes to visit my favorite side character, Japheth the goat. Or Japheth, I don't know. Anyway, he's a goat that can only sing because he's had a spell cast on him. Now, why is this in the movie? I don't know, but it's hilarious. And it accentuates one of my favorite parts of this movie. The original music is actually very, very good, all throughout Hoodwinked. These songs remind us that while this movie is still kind of a mystery, that it's still having fun. And you can tell that the producers and developers had fun making this movie too. This song was also a good way to transition Red's trip to Granny's, even though she's had a detour. Now, after one of my favorite songs in movie history, they go down what I'm gonna call a mine shaft, because I don't actually know what the real name is. And you can see them go off of a broken mine shaft railway and fly high up in the air. Then Red sees what looks like a vision of her grandmother telling her to use the hood or else she'll die. And Red survives, the goat does too, because you know, your boy always came prepared. Come on now, we just heard him sing a classic song about it 5 minutes ago. Anyway, yeah, Red gets to the house, meets the wolf again, and yeah, that's how her story gets wrapped up. Alright, so at this point, what we know is that Red went out to give the recipes to Granny, she accidentally fell over a cable car, ran into a scary ass wolf that chased her, and we saw a vision of Granny in the clouds. Up next, we have the wolf story. Now before they go back to the flashbacks, some cops in the room notice him. We realize that the wolf is actually a reporter, and this makes us less suspicious of him because it seems like he's just doing his job. Alright, so the wolf says he's been undercover trying to get the scoop on the bandit, and he himself finds Red suspicious of some baked good tomfoolery. And he has some pretty good reasoning for it, I'm not gonna lie. For one, they're one of the few establishments left that hasn't had their recipes stolen, and Red doesn't really seem that fazed about it. I get it. So the wolf and his squirrel friend, Twitchy, spend most of the arc tailing Red Riding Hood and asking their sources for intel. Now, Twitchy is one of my favorite characters, but I'm not going to be talking about him a lot in this video because I really don't want to make this a plot diagnosis. But those of you that have seen the movie know that Twitchy is a very funny character and I hold him near and dear to my heart. Now the thing that really sets his story apart from Red's is when Red is on the cable car. The wolf is trying to eavesdrop on the conversation, and he only gets bits and pieces that make it seem like Red and Granny are actually trying to get these recipes and rule the goody world. These are bits and pieces of a full conversation that we've already heard before. So it kind of crosses off Wolf as the bandit because he suspects that Red and Granny are the bandit, even though he's eavesdropping on a conversation that we've already heard in full. Now we also get to hear the wolf's side of the forced encounter with Red, in which he gets his ass kicked by Red using karate, or taekwondo, or some martial art on him.
Save it, Red Foo!
And this really eliminates him from the bandit conversation, because I mean, like, damn, bro, you got your ass whooped by Red Riding Hood. Alright, now the key things that we have to remember from the wolf story is that Boingo shows up again, and he gives them a shortcut to Granny's house. Now this probably went unnoticed, but you'll notice Twitchy's facial expression, which indicates that he's kind of suspicious of how the bunny just showed up. This is something that you probably didn't give as much thought until you watch the movie again. Now another thing that you learn is that the wolf and Twitchy are the ones that blew up the cave railroad, because Twitchy hilariously lit dynamite in mistake for candles. I love this movie. Also, the other thing we see is that the granny was already tied up somehow when the wolf got to her crib. A plot point that didn't really sound believable at the beginning of the movie, but it kinda checks out. So now after hearing all of this, we go back to Red's point. The scary ass wolf wasn't really that scary, and we learned that Red was really the aggressor, not the wolf. Now we move on to our third storyline, the Axeman Kirk.
More about this fellow with the axe. How does he fit into all of this?
Maybe you should axe him yourself. He was swinging.
And this part of the story matters the least to the plot, but a few important things happen. Now if you noticed earlier, Kirk was featured in Red Riding Hood's story looking sad as hell. When you find out it's because he's not really a good actor, and that he just got denied for another acting role in a commercial. After this, you hear the Schnitzel song, which was heard briefly in the Wolf's backstory. Now, people say that the animation creeped them the hell out. I look at this scene and, dog, I totally understand, okay? I understand. Looking back on it, like when I was a kid, I didn't really notice, but I understand, guys. I'm sorry. Now, while Kirk is hopping and handing out Schnitzel, his truck gets messed up and everything gets stolen. And at this point, Boingo appears and says this.
Oh, that's too bad. It's not easy being in the goodie business these days, huh?
I'm getting schnitzeled left and right today. I cannot even sell the bunion cream. Now I'm going to lose my
Well,
job.
chin up, mister. Maybe someday somebody will open up a great big goodie shop and we can all work for that little guy.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if you were listening closely, you can see that Boingo basically tipped us off about the fact that he's the bandit and his master plan, which we'll talk about later. However, Kirk's backstory seems so irrelevant to the main plot that for a second you might tune out and miss that Easter egg. No pun intended, because he did write directions on an Easter egg earlier in the movie. And now Kirk reacts like, wait, what? But again, this clue is followed up by something so abrupt that we don't really have time to focus down on what Boingo said. So while yes, he is giving it away to the more astute movie watchers, this movie is also trying to steer you away from the obvious hints and clues. Also, I feel like I need to remind everyone, is that this is a kid's movie. And like, I was 10 years old when I saw this, so I really wasn't picking up on all of these clues, tidbits, and Easter eggs in this movie, okay? Anyway, back to the story. So while the Axeman has some funny parts, only a small part of it helps the cops, but Boingo's slip-up helps the audience if they were paying attention. So then the last character to get interrogated is actually Granny. And this is the most important interrogation in my opinion, and it's important that it's at the bookend of Red's interrogation. Up until this point, we've just seen Granny doing what appears to be knitting and ending up tied in a closet somehow. However, when the cops open up a closet of their own, they find out that Granny is actually an extreme sports-loving maniac, and that's when the ridiculousness of this movie turns up a little bit. Now, during her interrogation, we find out that instead of knitting, she was apparently about to go to a ski tournament, and we understand why she didn't want Red to come to her house. Now, when we get to Ski Mountain, she runs into Boingo, who seems nervous, like he wasn't expecting to have this encounter, but he asks her to sign this clipboard, with some strange writing on the back of it, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, this evil ski team is up against Granny and her animal homies. Now, while the ski team is doing everything to wipe out her team and try to kill little old Granny, she takes a call from Red during the ski race. Which, damn, that's admirable, man. And in this phone call, we understand why Granny was so distressed earlier in Red's story. Because I'm not gonna lie, for 10-year-old me, it kinda did not make sense at all. Were we supposed to think that the wolf got to her? Because, like, that's not what I thought. Ever. Alright, anyway, after the ski team reportedly gets the best of her, she gets the information that the ski team was hired by the bandit, but they can't reveal who it is. Who could it possibly be? Well, it's pretty obvious that the bandit would hire them, because if they didn't, they would just be homicidal maniacs sliding on an ice mountain, and it wouldn't really serve any purpose to the movie's plot, or really anything else. We also figure out that Granny started the avalanche that Wolf and Red both experienced in their stories. And then we realize that Granny wasn't actually a vision, but rather it was her in the sky from the aftermath of the ski race. Pretty ridiculous, but this whole movie is ridiculous, so yeah, I guess it works. And the last fact that we are left with is that Granny tied herself up because of the parachute getting caught with the fan. So now, going back to Red's interrogation or point of view, we find out that the wolf wasn't scary and that Granny wasn't actually a vision. Now, when Granny's interrogation ends, the characters in the movie don't know who the bandit is. But the focus then shifts to Granny and Red's relationship. Here, Red was having to do all of these deliveries and not do any of this adventurous stuff, and she has to find out the hard way that Granny is out there having the time of her life, and well, yeah, I'd be mad too. Anyway, Red and Granny hash it out, and by hash it out, I mean Red talks to a family member in a way that would have gotten me punished, and then leaves the house. Where the reporters don't recognize her and decide to chase a jogging polar bear in a red hood instead. Idiots. We get this nice original song about how Red is sad and that Granny probably lied to her growing up a lot. So Red's having an identity crisis. Yay! Alright, so while she's out sulking, the bandit sneaks in and decides to steal the remaining recipes and goodies because everyone else is too distracted. By the time the characters in the movie realize who the bandit is, it's too late. Now, if you have gotten this far into the video and don't know who the bandit is, it's Boingo. It's the bunny, dude. Come on. Now, during this big reveal, they show the bunny ears first, and I wish they had shown it last because it would have made the reveal a smidge more suspenseful. Anyway, during all this build-up, it shows how Boingo was the only one in the cable car when Red fell, and he also knew a shortcut to Granny's, and he was there when the snitcher truck got robbed, and why he was on the mountain with the ski team. So, yeah. By this point in the movie, the reveal is obvious, but if you look back at certain parts of the movie, you'll realize that the movie did not really try to hide this villain at all. And I actually appreciate that. I also wonder how the movie would have ended up if he was also in the house when the four characters met each other for the first time. I think it would have been interesting if he had also given a statement, and then as he leaves, the cops find a discrepancy and that makes us realize that he's the bandit on some old usual suspect shit. Anyway, throughout this whole movie, there are some weird ass tells that give away Boingo's evil nature. But you're only going to notice them when you rewatch or go back in the movie. And that's why I say that this movie is more comprehensive when you watch it a second or third time. It's like when you watch a detective show and don't pick up on the clues the first time. It happens. Now the first tell is the cable car. When you go back to the original scene in Red's point of view, when Red falls, you can see that Boingo isn't actually trying to save Red. He's trying to save the goodie basket so that he can steal them. In the conversation before that, Red gives away the information that the recipes are in her possession. When Red tells her side of the story, we're clouded by Red's trust in Boingo that we saw from earlier. And that makes us believe that Boingo actually cares about Red. However, when you see the shot of him as she's falling out of the car, we briefly see his facial expression. And that's not the facial expression of someone that just saw their friend fall out of a cable car. I mean, look at that face! And this is just 12 minutes into the movie. And again, it's followed up really quickly with a wide shot so that we don't really focus in on Boingo's facial expression. The second clue really is when he talks to Kirk and hints at someone opening a big goodie place and everyone can work for that little guy. He says little because he means himself. If he didn't say the word little, we wouldn't suspect him as much. We would still suspect him a little bit, but not as much. Alright, now the third clue is not really meant to be picked up at all, but it's his clipboard when he meets Granny. When you compare seeing his clipboard the first time and when you see it during the reveal, you'll realize that the clipboard writing is the same. Now the first time you can't see the writing, but you can see a checklist, as if he's been planning something. I honestly don't expect anyone to get that one unless you're actually looking for it in the movie, or looking for it the second time around. Now that we've gotten those out of the way, I want to dissect Boingo's motivations as a villain. To me, a good villain is someone whose ideals we can relate to at its base. Like, the base reason can be relatable, but the way the villain goes about to combat it might not be the best way. For example, in Avengers Infinity War, Thanos wants to end the unnecessary suffering caused by population growth. And yeah, that sounds like a good idea on the surface until you realize that he wants to wipe out half of the entire universe. Damn it, Thanos, you were so close. So in the case of Boingo, he was frustrated with being told what to do and working for the Muffin Man all the time. He was also tired of being overlooked and wanted to prove that he could be the big boss. At this point, you can understand why he felt compelled to steal all the recipes, because in his mind, that's way easier than starting a startup goodie business. I mean, you gotta have investments, you gotta have like actual recipes, like original recipes, you gotta have real estate. There's a whole lot of things that go into a startup. Stealing recipes is way easier, that's what I'm trying to say. This bunny is working 2 probably minimum wage jobs in the forest. Not a lot of options, I get it. Now before I go into this business plan, I just want to say that I got a D- in economics in high school one quarter, and luckily I turned that into a C in college, so I might botch this, but I'm trying, okay? Now, Boingo wants to create a monopoly on the goodie business, which means that he'd be the only one selling and making the goodies. In addition to manufacturing the goodies, he would also add a specific ingredient to the snacks that would make them more addictive. This is a parallel to how the sugar industry makes a lot of things addictive as hell. So, the more addictive the Boingo snacks are, the more people will buy his products and the more powerful and successful he will be. It's here you realize that this is a very suspect plan. I mean, if you steal all the goodies and magically one big goodie place shows up that has all the other recipes that were stolen, come on, man. You steal one recipe, you start small, you then acquire, form partnerships, and then form your empire. Food truck. Start with a food truck. You gotta make sure you gotta get the food truck first, then you go Boingo Mart, alright? Food truck. Give out free samples on that food truck, then you get a restaurant, then you get an empire. You can't just skip to that step. This plan perfectly sums up Boingo's insanity and inexperience with running a business. Now, phase 3 of his plan is to blow up most of the forest to make his empire. And that's where this plan gets really weird, because you realize that Boingo doesn't give a shit about anything in the forest, and really isn't thinking about his potential clientele as well. Now, in the real world, when humans demolish a forest or something to make new real estate, the animals don't jump out and be like, please stop, because they can't freaking talk. In this world, not only is he blowing up the land of the entire general population that we have seen in this movie, but he's blowing up his own natural habitat as well. Displacing a ton of potential customers is not gonna be good for business. What are you doing? Anyway, throughout the movie and seeing his plan, we can see that Boingo is an incredible manipulator, but not really a master tactician. Throughout the film, his own hubris and pride seep through the movie. He's able to trick Red into thinking that he's liked her all this time, and was able to build enough trust for her to divulge that she was taking a top secret recipe book to Granny. He was also able to convince the wolf to take a detour route through an underground tunnel, which were 2 of the things that he had on his evil plan checkbook. However, in his pride, he gives away his motives to Kirk and was easy enough to arouse the suspicion of the head detective, Flippers, someone that has never met him, by the way. Boingo has an interaction with all 4 characters in the house, and that simply just gives him away, because he's in all these places at once. It's just not a coincidence. if Boingo is only seen by Red and Wolf, and not Kirk and Granny, the suspicion wouldn't be on him. Because then he'd just be a bunny that lost his job and then gave the wolf bad direction. Anyway, all of this nitpicking aside, I like Boingo as a villain. He was pretty funny. And he also benefited from the bad animation that didn't age well to make him look even more sinister. So anyway, after finding out that Boingo is actually the bandit, Granny, Wolf, and Kirk go up to the mountain to stop Boingo after Red stupidly goes after them alone. Because we soon see that Boingo and Red are diametric opposites that both share the incessant need to prove themselves. Red at this point wants to prove that she's grown up enough to do extreme awesome shit like leave the forest and hang out with Granny, which is why she follows Boingo and goes on the cable car alone instead of going back to the police and telling them where they're headed. And when she goes up to the cage, we kind of think that she can hold her own because the villain is a small bunny and she'd previously beat up a wolf. But once again, a thing we thought about Boingo was again turned on its head as we find out that Boingo is fluent in ear martial arts. Irati? Alright, I'm sorry. I apologize. Now there are a few things in this fight that I love, and one of them is in the background, one of the ski team members is trying to make fighting moves during the fight, and it looks so stupid. I just don't know what he's doing. Is he like shadow boxing? It looks pretty dumb. I've seen this movie 20 times, and I only noticed this the last time. This is what I'm saying was like, this movie actually just makes me laugh. I find something new about it every time, which is weird. When Boingo knocks out Red, he says this.
Why don't you go home and cry to your granny? Dolph, tie up the brat. Lisa, hold the book. Vincent, get the truck. And Keith, darn it, change your name, please. That's not scary, and I'm embarrassed to say it. Boris, try that. Keith, you know? Oh, watch out for Keith.
It's actually one of my favorite lines in the film. Also, another note is that when he's doing his evil reveal song, the ski team is dancing so stupidly in the background, just to remind us that this movie is not that serious.
I'm gonna be top of the woods. Let's bring it on home. I said I'm gonna be top of the woods. You've been hoodwinked, baby. Oh yeah.
Sweet tea and cookies. We got to do something.
I know. The song was catchy, but the choreography was terrible.
When we see Red crying, it makes us think that maybe she isn't ready for the big, bad forest after all. And you know what? I'd feel that way too if I just got destroyed by a bunny. Now, the last part of the movie is pretty cliche. Granny, Wolf, and Kurt come to the lair to try to save Red. Red gets helped by Granny and uses the hood trick that Granny taught her earlier to confirm that she is a pucket after all, and everything ends happily ever after. Yay! Standard kid movie shit. Now at the end you get Granny, Wolf, and Red, who are all friends now through this experience, and they're approached by Flippers, who wants to recruit them as agents and uses the things they like doing as recruiting tools.
What kind of work are we talking about?
You'd be undercover, on impossible missions, to faraway places. There's a lot of stories out there that need a happy ending. I'm part of a secret organization that makes sure that happens.
Happily Ever After Agency?
Now at the time, I didn't think they were going to make a sequel, but they did 6 years later, and if you want me to talk about this, please subscribe and like this video and tell me in the comments below, and I might watch that. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this. Hoodwinked is one of my favorite movies, and I hope y'all had as much fun watching this as I did making it. I usually don't do movie breakdowns. I'm not like a film student or anything. I majored in journalism, so I know how to use a camera, if that counts. But I did my best, and if y'all got all the way through this part of the video and y'all still think it sucked, hey man, I understand. But hey, I finally got to talk about a movie no one else talks about really, so y'all can't tell me shit. Alright, anyway, love y'all. Bye.
just to hit the spill.